This podcast is part of the Robots Radio Rocket Club, a program designed to help all podcasts reach their full potential. For information about joining the Robots Radio Rocket Club, check out robotsradio.net.
Welcome to the Inheritance Cycle Page by Page podcast, where we'll be reading through all 4 books in the Inheritance Cycle series, chapter by chapter, page by page. We'll also offer our own insights, theories, and first impressions of the wonderful world of Allegacia. May good fortune rule over you, may the stars watch over you, and may peace live in your heart.
Hello and welcome to the Inheritance Page by Page podcast, where we read and discuss the Inheritance or Aragon books and talk about first impressions and insights and other things that we have with this book. This is our first ever episode, and I am one of your hosts, Austin, otherwise known as Teacup, and I'm here with my other host.
I am She-Cup or Shelby, and I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah, and so just a quick overview of what this podcast is it's really just kind of like a book club. So we're going to talk about the books, give a brief overview of what happened in the chapter, and then give some kind of impressions or insights. This is Shelby's first time reading these series, so she'll give some like first thoughts and impressions, and I'm going to try not to give away the story in my facial reaction. And that's going to be the game of this podcast.
I think I'm going to win that game.
Probably. So I'm going to give an overview of this chapter. So we are starting at the very beginning with the Aragon book, and today was the prologue. And so what happens to this is we are introduced into the world of Allegacia with a shade and a group of Urgles who are waiting for some type of ambush. And 3 elves ride in, and the shade ambushes them and kills 2 of the elves, and the lead elf, who we know is an elf woman, is carrying some type of object that she then uses magic to send away, and then the shade captures that said elf, and that's the end of the prologue, A Shade of Fear. So that's kind of the overview. So Shelby, tell me, what are some first impressions you have of this chapter?
So the first thing, okay, actually, let me back up. I always have a little notebook with me, so I always take notes on stuff, and I took notes on this when I read it. And the first thing I wrote down was, WTF is a shade.
We will learn.
I don't like it. It has crimson hair and maroon eyes.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like a demon to me, so I don't like that. The second thing I wrote down is about the Urgles. I wrote down their description. So from the book, this is what the book says. Thick arms, short bowed legs, twisted horns, grunting, and on page number 1, first page, right out of the gate, they're described as monsters.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this is accurate, but in that short description, it feels like they're short. Like, are they small?
No.
They're big.
They're huge.
Okay. The way it's talked about sounds like they're small in my mind. I don't know why. But to me, I think you've said this before, and I agree. They very much remind me of Kunari from Dragon Age already. And I think that's probably mostly because they have horns growing out of their head.
Yes. They're very similar. Any other first impressions?
And they bleed black. Like,
yes.
Their blood is black. So are Urgles actually evil, or is that just like their perception? Let me guess. You're not going to tell me.
Read and find out.
You're annoying.
You
are annoying.
Not all is as it seems.
Sure. I mean, if all was as it seemed, it would be a boring book.
Very early on with this book, and like just kind of taking on the trope here, is the trope that like they are similar to orcs, like because the orcs in Lord of the Rings, they bleed black, and
right,
that's like a signify of something bad or whatever.
Well, so orcs in the Lord of the Rings, though, they're created not by they're not a species that just exists, right? Like they're created. So are Urgles the same, or are they they're a group that's always been in Alagacia? Like, what's the deal?
So we'll learn the history of Alagacia as the books go on. It is not the same as orcs in that regard.
Okay.
The other thing is that in Lord of the Rings, specifically, there's different origin stories for the orcs, if I remember correctly. So there is the one that they were made, or elves twisted by darkness and evil, but I'm not 100% sure on what is accepted as fact and what is there's an in-universe conflict here.
I see.
The Urgles are different in a way. The Shade is evil.
100%.
100%.
Well, I'm just going to say this. Nothing that has red eyes is ever not evil.
Yes.
I'm just going to stand by it.
You have anything else about first impressions?
No, the last thing I have to say is more of a prediction.
All right. Well, then I'll just say as a reading through this, it was things that stood out to me in this chapter. I find it interesting and maybe even just a little bit problematic that in the first introduction of the Shade is that what signifies him as not human is his red hair and maroon eyes. Now, the maroon eyes I get, but I feel like is the red hair playing into that whole gingers don't have souls kind of thing.
Ginger slander. You're only saying this because you have a red beard.
No, I just thought about it.
We hate gingers. Not really.
Yeah,
Just
this
kidding.
is what happens when you're reading something for the 10 millionth time.
I think 10 millionth is generous.
Maybe.
What else stuck out to you?
Nothing really besides that, other than things I don't want to share right now, just because of interesting things. Just the way. So this isn't too big of a spoiler because I'm not going to give away. So this event is described later in this book and later in other books. It comes back to it, which is why I had to start with the prologue. And so it's just interesting to me because there is this attention to detail, the way the story plays out doesn't really change very much in its retelling in the other books.
Right.
But yeah. And then we're introduced to a lot here. We're introduced to the Urgles, we're introduced to a Shade, we're introduced to the elf, we're introduced to magic, and not just magic, but the language in which magic is used, which will, as we read on, we'll get involved into that.
Yeah, I wrote that down too. What does Garjula? I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. I was what does that mean? Who knows what that is?
Well, fun fact. There is a glossary in the back of the book. So if you go into the ancient language, he doesn't actually have. Oh, yeah, it means light.
Interesting.
Yeah. All right. So you got predictions?
I have one prediction, and that is that I think the stone thing will become very, very important.
Yeah.
That's it.
Interesting. All right, so not a lot going on in this chapter. So that's really all we have. This is what this podcast will be. It's designed to be short and just an kind of analysis of that. This one's pretty straightforward. There's not a lot going on. But as far as I'm concerned, I think it is a way to it's a good intro to a story. There's a lot you're introduced with without, fantasy writers tend to just throw you into a world and not explain anything. But I feel like this doesn't throw too much at you without explaining it.
Yeah, sometimes we talk about, especially in other fantasy series, Lord of the Rings, Dragon Age, other things, it feels like you're drinking from a fire hydrant or a water hose. There's so much lore going on, and it's overwhelming, and you miss stuff every time. I don't necessarily feel that with this, but granted, it's also a 4-book series. They've got tons of time, and also it's designed for children. So anyway, yeah, it makes sense.
I totally agree with that. I think that's all we have for this little prologue, a short little prologue. And so we'll be back again at the end of the week for Discovery.
We will.
All right. Thanks for listening to the Inheritance Page by Page podcast. We'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to the Inheritance Cycle Page by Page podcast. Follow us on Twitter at Inheritance Page or email us at inheritancepage@gmail.com. Make sure you join us on Discord, in the Cups Podcasting, and more. All links are in the episode description. May good fortune rule over you. May the stars watch over you, and may peace live in your heart.
Hi, I'm Aaron.
And I'm Ariel.
And we're the hosts of the Legend of Zelda Lorecast, podcast about all things Legend of Zelda, from Errol to Zora.
And all the fun things in between.
If you're ready to dive deep and learn more about the Legend of Zelda lore and everything surrounding it, come join us on the Legend of Zelda Lorecast. You can find us on Apple iTunes, Spotify, Google, or wherever else you get your podcasts.
We hope to see you soon.